Hi everyone, this is Parthy, and hi Sarah.
Hi, Parth.
Um, for the audiences who just joined in, um, I'm Parthy, and I'm going to be talking to Sarah, who's the author of The Plus One, and we're going to be talking about, I think, pretty much everything: books and literature and writing and whatever work she's done before and all of that. And this live stream has been brought to you guys by the Karma Foundation and the Ahmedabad Book Club. So a huge thanks to them. Otherwise, I would be having a very boring Friday night right now. And yeah, let's not really waste a lot of time in lengthy introductions and let's get to talking to you. So, hi, Sarah. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
It is a pleasure. So, how has everything been, wherever you are?
It's going all right in the scale of 2020. It's going all right. COVID cases obviously are kind of ticking up here, and I think a lot of places. So,
Hmm.
just kind of staying at home, having kind of a quiet holiday season, but it's a good time to read. So that's always a good excuse to pick up a book, I guess. How about for you? How are things going where you are?
There again, they're going as good as they can in 2020.
Yeah.
Fortunately, I don't have to, I am not facing many of the risks that other people are facing, people who are going outside and working and whatnot. So, all I have to do is stay at home. So, it's a very easy task right now and just attend classes and everything. So, it's not all that bad. But I really, really want this to get over very soon because there's so many people I have to meet and so many things I have to do.
Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to hopefully this time next year we'll be able to travel again. Things will be opened up. So hopefully better things on the horizon, which is nice to look forward to.
Yeah, definitely. I think this is one of the very few times that everyone is pretty much on the same page as to what they want from the new year.
Yeah,
And everyone's decided this time. So at least we're united all on that front.
that's true. And it's interesting because usually the new year feels very symbolic, like it doesn't actually change anything, but it feels like this year, oh, it's really a new year. Like 2021, I think and I hope is going to look very different from 2020. So
Right.
there is that actual sense of like looking forward to something different and to a big change, which kind of makes it more exciting going into the new year.
Yeah, that's fair. And also, it's been a little weird in terms of processing the year as well because uh, March was probably like 2 weeks ago. It went by really fast, at least for me, because again, I was just having to stay at home and not do much. So it's also a little difficult to process that we're going to be in 2021 very soon. And I'm
Mhm.
still reeling from that. But like you said, I'm really hoping things take a turn for the better and pretty soon we're all out of this.
I think they will. I think they will.
Great. Okay, so let's talk a little bit first because we're going to talk about your book and everything, and there's a lot of stuff that I want to discuss related to your book. But before that, I just want to have a little conversation about your journey before writing because
Mhm.
that's something that I always find very interesting. How do you get from that point A of being someone who's interested in writing and then to the point of having a book that is published and that you're discussing with people right now. So what has
Sure.
that been like?
Well, for me, that point A of being someone who's interested in writing goes back almost as long as I can remember. Like I've known that I wanted to be a writer since I was probably about 7 years old. I never really wanted to do anything else. So it's something that I've always done just, personally for fun. And I've known for a long time that I wanted to make a career in one way or another as a writer. So it's always been something I've been working towards, but I've taken kind of a little bit of circuitous path to get there. I studied writing in school. I was an English major in college, and I also did two minors, one in creative writing, which was primarily focused in poetry. And then I also did a screenwriting minor, which was awesome because a lot of schools don't have that. So the fact that the school that I went to had a program dedicated to that was really nice. And then when I was leaving college in my last semester, they have this program that you can get into where they help place you in an internship in Los Angeles, working in film or TV. And you intern during the day and then you take class at night. So I did that in my last semester. I was interning at a studio working for like cable television. And then I stayed in LA after graduation and was working. I worked for a while at like management slash production company and then a different production company. So I was really focusing mostly on screenwriting at that point. Partly because I love screenwriting, I love film and TV, and I think being able to write for a visual medium like that is really cool. And creatively, there are things about that that excite me, but also it was, I think I was aiming towards going into TV partly because it seemed like a way to actually make a kind of a living as a writer or a job as a writer, which, you know, it's obviously very difficult to write full time and to be able to make a living that way. But I knew that in TV they have actual like staff writers, so called, where they hire you to write on the staff of a TV show. So that seemed to me like, okay, that's like the most straightforward way to make a career where I'm just writing full time. So
Right.
that was sort of what I was aiming for initially. And I did like the whole assistant hustle in LA where you're like working these assistant jobs with crazy long hours and you're trying to do networking outside of that and trying to do like your own writing on the side. So I really only had time for screenwriting at that point. I've always liked writing fiction and writing poetry and other things as well, but those all kind of got put on the back burner. And I was out there for several years, and then ended up actually moving away to St. Martin in the Caribbean, of all places. So that was a very big change in my life. And my schedule opened up, and so I was able to finally sit down and write a novel, which is when I wrote The Plus One. And so that was, you know, the first novel I've ever tried to write. I thought going into it like, okay, I'll try to get this published, but I honestly didn't think that it would work. I thought it would be too difficult. And so I was also thinking like, okay, well, maybe I'll try to self-publish it too. But I tried for traditional publishing first and it worked. I was surprised, but I actually did get it published. And so here I am. But I think, you know, that the work that I did leading up to it, even though I had never tried to write a novel before, all of the background I had in screenwriting, I think was really helpful and really informed my process as a writer. So it all, you know, it took me years to get to that place where I was able to try writing a novel and I had sort of the space and the bandwidth in my life to do that. But all of the writing I did leading up to that was good practice, I think.
Right. But did you ever, and I don't really know much about the difference between, uh, let's say, screenwriting is essentially what you were doing, right? And then coming to write a fictional book and all. I mean, I understand the basic differences, of course, but is it really huge, the gap between those two? Does it leave you reeling where you're like, oh, okay, you sit down to write and you feel like, wait, hold on, there's a lot of dissonance here. I don't understand. Not understand, but at least I'm not well acquainted with the format I'm writing right now since I've been doing a different format for so long.
I think both yes and no. It's definitely different. I think the kind of fundamentals of good storytelling, of creating a plot that's interesting, that has movement, that has suspense of one sort or another, that has strong conflict for the characters, and creating characters who are interesting and dynamic. Those kind of basic tenets are the same in screenwriting or in fiction. So you carry those principles with you either way, but there are definitely big differences. And I know, you know, writing this novel, it was a real adjustment. I had written short fiction before, like short stories, but I hadn't even done that much of that. And I'd certainly never tried to write something that long. So it was very different. And even now, like I do some fiction, I do some screenwriting. And if I have only been doing one for a little while and then I jump back into the other, it is sort of like a seismic shift in my mind where I have to
Right.
reorient myself. I remember like when I was writing this novel for the first time, it was interesting because one of the things that you can do in fiction that you can't do in screenwriting is you can just come out and say things. Like you could just say
Right.
like the character is thinking this or feeling this, or this is why he's doing X, Y, or Z, which you can't do in a screenplay. Obviously, you have to put everything into the words and the actions, the dialogue and the actions. So I almost felt guilty when I was writing this, like just coming out and saying like Kelly is thinking such and such, or Kelly feels sad or whatever. So that was one thing that was actually kind of nice in writing fiction, to have that freedom. But I think there are things that are easier and harder about both, for sure. But I like writing both. I think it's a good exercise for a writer to do multiple things. It kind of works different parts of your brain. Like even if you have one type of writing or one genre that you know, like this is what I do, this is my kind of bread and butter and what I really love. I think if you can still push yourself to kind of go outside of that and try writing other things sometimes too, it's really good. It kind of works those other muscles in your brain.
Okay, that sounds great. It also sounds like you got to, like you're saying, you managed to cover all different formats of writing. So now you can say that you have an overall, like a developed um, brain when it comes to writing, because you've experimented and then tried all so many different formats.
Yeah, I'm trying. I think the one area that I haven't really dabbled that much in yet that I would like to in the future is playwriting,
Oh,
which I've
yeah.
never really tried. Obviously, there are similarities between that and screenwriting, but I think there are also some pretty significant differences. So that's something that's kind of like on my bucket list. At some point, I want to figure out kind of the nuts and bolts of how to write a play and try my hand at that. But yeah, I love poetry too. I love both short and long fiction, both TV and film. So yeah, like I was saying, I think it's good for any writer to write multiple things. Every type of writing that I've tried, I feel like I learned lessons from that I can carry over into the other areas. So it's good practice.
That sounds great.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to ask so many things about the different types of writing that you've done. But before it gets too specific for people, I'd like to first steer the conversation a little bit over to the book, because I read a part of it at least right now. I'm hoping to read the rest of it very soon. Uh, and I really enjoyed it. You know, it was very, like, it was easy to connect with the character, at least the protagonist for me, because I think the themes and everything are really relatable. But instead of me going off about that, why don't you give a basic idea to the audiences about your book?
Sure. So, well, I have it here so you can see the cover. It's called
Yeah,
The Plus
it's
One.
also a really pretty cover. I really like it.
They did a great job with it. I love like this color too is like one of my favorite colors. So I was happy that they chose that.
Yeah,
um,
and I also see those little notes that I'll ask you later on about. But
yeah.
first,
Well,
you
this
go
is
ahead.
this is the copy that I took with me when I was doing my book tour. So I had to like
Yeah.
do readings. So I marked different places in it. So that's where that's from. Um, but yeah, so it's a romantic comedy, but it also has kind of some sci-fi elements to it with robotics and AI. It takes place in Silicon Valley, and the protagonist is this young woman named Kelly, who's a robotics engineer working in Silicon Valley. She, for her work, she makes these kind of like hyper real, very advanced humanoid robots. Um, and she loves the work that she does, and she's very good at it. But her personal life is not going quite as well as her career. She's kind of like awkward with guys, and she's always single, and her mom is always on her back about it and trying to get her to like find Mr. Right and settle down. And so when her younger sister is getting married and she has to have a date to bring to the wedding, she decides she's just going to build one. She's kind of tried everything else with regular dating and it hasn't worked out for her. So she's just going to make her own perfect boyfriend. And since she's making him, she does decide to make him like her perfect ideal man, because why not? If you're going to build a boyfriend, why
Yeah.
not do everything that you want? So she builds Ethan, and he's handsome, he's charming, he literally has access to Google in his brain, so he's very smart. And he looks and sounds and moves and feels just like a human, so he can kind of pass through human society and nobody understands that he's a robot. So at first it's great because like she manages to pass him off as her real boyfriend. Everyone is so impressed. She has her wedding date. Um, But then as time goes on and she's spending more time with him, she actually kind of starts to develop feelings for him. Like their relationship becomes more and more real to her the more time they spend together. She almost forgets in some ways that he's a robot and that he's not a real person. And so it creates a conflict for her because on the one hand she knows that she needs to get rid of him. Like keeping him around is putting a lot of things in her life into jeopardy because she built him using stolen equipment from work in the lab
Right.
secretly. So if they find out that she did that, obviously she'll lose her job. In her personal life, if people find out that this like amazing boyfriend she suddenly has is a fraud and she had to build him because she couldn't get a date, she'll be humiliated. So she knows the right thing to do is to get rid of him, and that was all of her plan from the beginning. But as time goes on, she can't bring herself to do that because she's starting to actually fall for him. So everything kind of spirals out of control in her life, and that's sort of where the story takes off.
Yeah, I have to say, I really understand that. I mean, I wouldn't want to let go of someone that perfect either.
Yeah,
So,
and I think that was one of the challenges for me in writing this was obviously he's a robot, so it's not like a standard relationship. But I wanted to
yeah.
get to a point where the reader can understand Kelly having feelings for him and also kind of feel themselves as they're reading like reading the book like I don't want her to get rid of him, I like
Mhm.
him too and I want this to go somewhere. So developing that real connection and making it feel like a true relationship even though one person is a human and one is a robot was kind of a challenge.
Yeah. Also, what really strikes out to me here is um, the dilemma that everyone has because like you said it's not just the protagonist but even the readers have this thing where they know that this is not right or they know that he's supposed to be gone after a while but they don't want him to go. So and I always love any book or movie or anything that just sort of puts that dilemma forward for the readers and this really lets you get involved, in the whole story and you it's kind of intellectually stimulating as well because it's letting you go to all these places inside, and explore what you're feeling about it. So I always really love that combination.
Well, I think I mean, I know certainly for me, and I think probably most people reading have never been in this situation. They've never built a robotic boyfriend and then had to figure out what to
Yeah,
do with him. But we've all probably been in situations where there's something that we know that we should do and we don't do it. I think
yeah,
that kind of power of inertia is something that we don't think that much about, but it's such a huge kind of factor in ruling how we live our lives and the choices that we make. There are a lot of situations where there's something where okay, I should do this, but it's always easier in the moment to not do it, to just keep doing the thing that I'm doing rather than making that change. And so, I
mm,
think for Kelly, she gets to a point in the story where she knows she should get rid of Ethan, and long term, that's the right thing for her. And keeping him around and keeping this whole ruse going is just making things harder. But in every moment that goes by, it's always easier to just keep with the status quo and to just keep him around and keep lying to people around her. So that's what she keeps doing, even though she knows in the back of her head, I need to break this pattern, I need to do something else. But it's so hard to kind of break yourself out of that mold. And so I think, like I said, this is sort of a outsized, unreal situation that most of us can't relate to, but that feeling of being stuck in a pattern and not knowing how to get out of it is something that a lot of us have probably experienced in our own lives in other ways.
yeah, definitely. And that's what I think is going to make this a very interesting read for me or anyone else watching that picks it up. And you also mentioned, writing poetry and everything, and all the other stuff that you've done. So you recently published this, or at least you released this book of poems. It's a collection of
Yeah.
poems, and I can say, I went and read those, and I can say definitely I enjoyed reading them, and so I can say that this is a great. Uh, it's an attractive piece to me in a way because the theme and everything is so interesting and all. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So it's a chapbook, which is like a short book of poems. It's called Weird Women. And this is just something that I did as sort of a personal project. Like I think I mentioned before, I've written poetry for years. I've always loved it, but it's always kind of been on the back burner for me because, I know that I'm never going to make a career as a poet. So my fiction, my screenwriting, which also just because they're longer projects, so they sort of take up more of my time and my thought,
Yeah.
they're always the priority, and poetry gets kind of put on the back burner because it's just something that I do for myself. But
Hmm.
I really wanted to get to a place where I was writing and reading poetry more regularly because I went, once I moved out to LA and was out of college, I went years basically without doing any poetry at all. And I felt like that was a real gap in my life and something that I was missing. So I wanted to motivate myself to read more poetry, to write more poetry regularly. So I decided to put together a short collection and just something that I would write for myself, and put it out on my website just on my own. And I decided on the title Weird Women and use that as sort of like an organizing theme, almost as a prompt to give myself kind of an idea to write around. So all of the poems are based around different sort of female characters. Some of them are literal characters from like mythology or the Bible or things like that. Some of them are characters that I've made up. Some of it is like different elements from nature that I've sort of personified as female characters. Um, and that was just a way to kind of get me going and give me inspiration for things to write about that would have sort of a unifying feel to them. And so I just wrote a bunch of different poems and put them together, and it's available on my website for free if anyone wants to download it. The site is saraharcherwrites.com, and it's up on, I think, both the blog, and I made a post about it on the news section there, so you can just go on and download it for free. But yeah, it was a really nice personal project, just kind of a creative release, something that's like totally different from the fiction writing and the screenwriting that I'm
Yeah.
doing. So yeah, it was a nice exercise, I think.
Yeah. And to anyone that's watching, I would recommend download it and read it. It's an enjoyable read. Uh, and what is you have, I think, about 12 or something poems on there.
Yeah, I think, yeah, between that, I think that sounds right, like 10 to 15.
Right. Yeah. And do you have a favorite one? Or at least from the characters that you've written about? The made up ones or even the biblical ones or something. Is there a favorite weird woman that you have?
Oh gosh. I don't know if I have a favorite. One poem in there that I really enjoyed writing is called, I'm probably pronouncing this wrong because it's a Latin term, caput medusa, which is, it's actually a medical phenomenon, which I heard about years ago and just, I thought the idea was really interesting. And I knew that I wanted to write about it, where my understanding as a layperson is that basically, like if your liver has certain issues, then these veins that are basically like the umbilical veins from when you were before you were born kind of come back into use. They've been like dormant your whole life, but then they can become useful again if your other veins and arteries are no longer useful. And it creates this like branching appearance on the abdomen, which is why it's named after Medusa, because it's like the snakes of her hair.
Yeah.
So that was the connection to like the weird women. But I wrote a poem about a fictional like father and daughter duo where the father is an alcoholic and is like dying of this disorder, and the daughter kind of handling that and watching that happen. And that one was interesting to me to write, just emotionally, but also a lot of times when I write poetry, I find that I'm drawing on like medical things or scientific things or stuff from nature that I just read about and that is interesting to me. And so that was one that was really, I thought that concept was really cool, that you can have like these veins that were in you as a baby, and then as an adult, all of a sudden they become useful again. I don't know. That's just an evocative idea to me. So I enjoyed writing that one.
It does seem to be a theme, or is it a theme in your writings, the scientific stuff? Because your book is based on, there's a lot of science involved there because she's building an actual robot. Then there's other nature related scientific stuff that you've addressed in your poetry and everything. Is that something that's a favorite for you, or something that you find easy to just explore?
Yeah, I think it is, and it's not something that I've ever like intentionally set out to make kind of a running theme in my writing. It's just something that's interesting to me. Like I said, I was an English major. I've always been a writer, so I'm not particularly educated in the sciences. But if I hear about something like the kaput medusa, or I read like a news article about something scientific that I find interesting, like I wrote a poem recently about I'm trying to remember the term because this was like maybe 6 months ago at least, but scutoids or brutoids or something. It was like this shape that was discovered in nature that they didn't know
Oh,
existed. Um, and I remember reading an article about it and just finding it very interesting that that could happen. And it's like it's a structure that is inside the human body. And so this idea that there's like something there inside all of us that has been there all along that we didn't know about and that someone else
yeah,
has now discovered and named and visualized. I just thought that was a really interesting idea. So I wrote a poem about it. So I don't know. That's something that I do find myself returning to a lot. And like with the plus one, I never set out to write something about robotics or AI. It wasn't like that was an area that I was particularly versed in or interested in. But just as a layperson, I think a lot of the stuff that's happening with AI in our society is interesting, and it's something that I'm very curious to know, like where certain trends are going to go in the future.
yeah,
So I
definitely.
guess I was just already like thinking about it in the back of my mind, and then when I had this idea about a female robotics engineer kind of building the perfect boyfriend, that was a great platform to explore some of those themes.
It actually really is quite intriguing because everyone's doing different stuff with AI. I've read a little bit of Dan Brown as well, and he has an interesting take on where we'll go in terms of AI and everything.
Yeah.
And there's, I mean, I off the top of my head, that's what came to me right now. But there are a lot of versions of how AI is going to go in the future, and it's really interesting to find out all of them. And then I'm gonna see, a few years down the lane, who was the closest to the truth. So that'll also be interesting.
For sure. And I mean, I wrote this, I guess, in 2015. I wrote the first draft. And I feel like even
Oh,
in the years since then, my thoughts on AI have changed. Like if I were to sit down and write this story from scratch today, I might approach it differently. And our societal ideas around AI, I think, are changing. And it's such a rapidly evolving field that I do think in the future, maybe I'll look back at this book and think about it differently. Readers in the future might read this story differently. I think like the idea of a human and a robot having a relationship is something that is obviously very foreign and even kind of like icky to us, but it's increasingly becoming reality. And
yeah,
people,
we're coming closer to it than like more closer than we'd have imagined probably a few years ago.
for sure, I think, I mean, even with smartphones, a lot of people have almost a relationship with their smartphone, not in the same way as with a human, but
Yeah,
they probably interact with it more than most people they know. They can feel, nervous or anxious if it's not close to them. Like we're becoming more and more connected to our technology, and I think that's only going to continue to develop as a pattern in the future.
probably will because especially with 2020, I think it's just the process has sped up maybe
Mhm.
by a lot because now we're all forced to depend on our devices and smartphones primarily for so much, for almost everything. So I think this year has just like you been like a catapult in a way. So let's see if we go back to what we were doing or if we just want to continue with this very comfortable thing that we've established now, doing everything online and everything at the tip of our fingers.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think when the pandemic kind of lessens and we're able to go out more, I think there will be a little bit of a reaction to that of people like wanting to go out and see other people and do things in person. And I don't think that will ever completely go away, but I think for sure, like you said, this is like catapulted us several steps forward along the trajectory
Yeah.
that we're going on. So some of those changes I think are going to be permanent.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to find out which ones. Let's
Yeah.
see that. And I have to ask again, since you've tried. almost every format of writing. What is your favorite part about writing? And not in a very academic kind of way, but there's something that makes you want to keep coming back to it, right? Because this is not that easy of a process. I mean, I've done a little bit of writing of my own as well, not nearly as much as you, but a little bit of trying on my end. And time and again, I keep realizing how difficult it is to stay committed to this thing, because it's one thing to write every now and then and just empty out your feelings or something on paper, and then it's another thing to be doing this full time. So what is that one favorite thing of yours, or one link that keeps connecting it to you even when you're maybe exhausted or not in the zone or something someday?
Yeah. I mean, I've been there. I think all writers have felt that. It's a hard process for
I think
sure.
we probably have. Yeah.
Yeah. But for those of us who love it, we do keep coming back to it, even though it's hard. And I think for me, like one thing that kind of transcends all the different media or genres that I like to work in is just the idea of writing at its core. It's almost like magic, because it's such an ephemeral thing. It's literally just thoughts that you're having, and you're able to communicate those to someone else, and it actually makes an impact on them, whether it's entertaining them, making them laugh, making them feel something, educating them, transporting them, or distracting them. There, you can do so many things with writing, but it starts with something that is literally just the thoughts inside your head, and you're kind of
Yeah.
transforming those thoughts inside someone else's head, which is a very weird process to think about, but it's amazing that we can do that. And I love how it's something that's so simple and so universal, yet it's so strong and powerful, and it speaks to us in such impactful ways. And I know just in my own life, sorry, my dog's barking. I, as a reader, have experienced that, and as a viewer, someone watching, TV and film, which obviously starts in the same way with an idea from a writer, um, it's something that is so small and so intangible, and yet so meaningful. And so I don't know. I think that's something that I really love about it. Sorry.
Does he want to say hi? Does he want to say hi to us?
I can try to grab him. Let me see. He just saw something out the window. Hold on one second.
Let's see. Oh, hello.
William. Say hi, William.
Hi, William.
He just turned 1, so he's got a lot of energy. Normally, this time of day, he just goes back to sleep in the mornings, but something woke him up, so hopefully he'll.
Yeah, no, I understand, William. I'm not a morning person either. I
Yeah,
completely support that choice. Yeah. He's done with his energy burst now.
we'll see. We'll see. He's on the guard. Yeah.
Yeah, so whatever you mentioned about driving, it makes sense to me. Although, but I think this is something that probably, I think it's like a science of its own, like you said, because there, with so many permutations and combinations, it works differently in everyone's head. But then the basic concepts are the same. You've got some stuff in your head, and you just need to see it on paper. Like you need to communicate it in a way. So the start and end point are probably the same for everyone, and but the process is so much different for everyone, and the execution and way of doing it is also really different from
Yeah.
person to person. So that's something that always amazes me about it.
Yeah, and even going back through history, I mean, you look into, oral storytelling from the Odyssey on, like it's something that has
Yeah.
been part of humanity, and something that I think we just naturally gravitate to. And like you said, the ways in which we do it have changed a lot and can change over time and over cultures. But that same basic premise of you have an idea and you transform it into a story and communicate that to someone else, that's such a universal thing. So
Yeah.
I think it speaks to something really deeply like in us as humans, the fact that you can see that across cultures. There's just something about it that we really respond to, I think, innately.
Yeah. And plus, I think your book has been translated into quite a few languages by now. So you must be, sorry, but you must be feeling that on a whole different level, right? Because Now
Mm.
it's a whole different experience that people from other places who may not who may not have come across your work if it was in a different language or in English or something, but now they probably will since it's in their language. um, Now they're going to get to consume something that you wrote from another part of the world. So I think this has become a reality for you in a way. And what is that experience like?
It's been kind of one of the coolest parts of getting a book published. It is
Mm.
very surreal to think about, someone in another country reading my work, translating it, which I know must be like such a process to take writing, especially writing that has humor in it because that's such a kind of specific cultural thing, and to try to turn it into another language. So I really appreciate the people that have done that. And it's weird because in a way, I kind of feel disconnected from it because I'm not involved in any of that. I'm not
Yeah,
part of the translation process. I'm not involved in like publishing in other countries or promoting it there, but I know that it's happening. I know there are people that in other countries might be reading my words or a version of them, which is very interesting to experience. And I know like the Japanese version of it just came out maybe a few weeks ago, which
mm.
was really cool. But it was interesting because um, I saw the cover of it, which it has like this very cool sort of anime style cover, which was interesting to
Yeah,
see.
I saw that one, I think, on your blog. It's
Yeah,
really
yeah,
cool.
yeah, it's beautiful. They did a great job with it. But one thing that stood out to me when I looked at that was the dress that Kelly is wearing on the cover. I didn't notice this until after I looked at the cover a couple of times, but it's like this kind of forest green dress that's sleeveless. And I realized that that was a dress that I described her as wearing in a scene in the book. And it's just sort of this,
Oh,
it's not an important thing. It's kind of a throwaway detail. Um, but I assume that's where they got that from and why they decided to draw her that way. And so it was just a really sort of weird moment to think that there was this idea that I had, you know, 5 or 6 years ago that was just sort of a small thought, not even something I put a ton of thought into. And then years later, somebody in Japan is like drawing an image of that. And so it just goes to show, again, like the power of writing and the way that you
yeah.
never know how your words are going to impact someone else or where they're going to end up. And that's this very unique and cool power that we have as writers, I think.
That's wild, honestly, because, like you said, your work is being looked into, and not as in an investigation or anything, but it's actually being analyzed or processed by someone to make art based on that work.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all in a different language and everything. So that must, I mean, if I was in the process, I'd probably feel very surreal. So I
Yeah,
understand that.
I think surreal is probably the best way to describe it.
Yeah. And about, you know, I think the whole process of translation and everything. So, like you said, you're not supposed to be involved so much in that entire process. But did you have any, anxiety or something about it? Because we are familiar with the concept of lost in translation and how it can, happen quite often. And this is not to say that the translators were not doing a good job or anything, because I'm sure they are. But even then, as someone who's sat and created this entire work, does it ever happen that you're like constantly obsessing, oh, will they get that right or this right or something, and then you have to um, tell yourself to calm down about it and let them do their job?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's definitely crossed my mind because I think there is, especially with creative writing, there's no such thing as an exact translation. I mean,
Yeah,
I know for me as a writer, and I'm sure you've felt the same thing when you write, we can put so much thought into every individual word and choosing a certain word for very specific reasons and because it has certain connotations or even a sound to it.
yeah,
And obviously, there's no way to exactly replicate that in another language. So there's always going to be things that are lost in translation. And so I've thought about that, but I also kind of put it out of my mind because there's nothing I can do about it. Like I
mm,
can't even read Japanese or German or these other languages, let alone translate something into them. So I know there are
yeah,
people out there reading, a version of my work that may or may not truly represent what I had in mind, but there's nothing I can do about it. So I'm not going to like waste my energy fretting about like, oh, well, did they get this right or did they get that? So I'm just grateful for the opportunity to get my work out there in some form to other cultures. I think that's a really cool thing. But yeah, I mean, there's never going to be a translation that 100% captures exactly what you're going for because that's just not possible.
Hmm. The best that you probably can do then is just like, put your trust in these people and let
Yeah,
them give out their interpretation of your work to their people.
yeah, for sure. I trust that they know what they're doing, and obviously they can do it much better than I could. So I'm happy to have them take care of that.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So moving the conversation a little bit away from writing and towards literature in general, since you've been writing for so long, there must be some source because sometimes it's that you grow up reading or something, and that translates into you wanting to write your own thing. But sometimes it's also that you just have watched a lot or basically consumed some or the other sort of art, and that has been inspiring in a way. So, what was it like for you? Were you a massive reader or a movie buff or both or something?
Yeah, for me, I think a little bit of both. I've always loved reading and I've always loved movies and TV shows. I think I knew as a kid that I loved reading and I loved writing fiction and poetry. It wasn't until I was like later into my teens that I started to realize like, oh, I also love watching movies and TV, and that's something that I could write as well. And there is like a writing aspect to it. So I kind of connected those dots later, but it's always been something that I've been interested in.
Hmm.
Um, I think just, I mean, I like a real variety of things. I like different genres, both to watch and to read and to write, frankly. But the kind of stories that I respond to most tend to be things that combine some element of comedy with some element of drama, or like a comedy that has heart to it, or that's dark or twisted in some way, or like comedy that has
Oh,
something else going on. And I think some of that is just because like in real life, there's humor and there's sad stuff and there's scary stuff and we experience so many different things even in the course of a single day. So when somebody can capture those different elements and bring them together into a story, I think that's really powerful. So yeah, that's something that I've drawn a lot of inspiration from as a reader and as a writer. Novelists or screenwriters who can capture different kind of dimensions of the human experience and bring them together seamlessly. That's something that I really love and that I hope to be able to replicate in my work over time, that I'm kind of striving for. But yeah, I mean, there are so many writers who have influenced me, and I'm always discovering new ones. So it's one of the great things about living in the modern world is there's way more content than we could ever consume, which sometimes can feel daunting and overwhelming, but it's nice. It's a luxury at the same time.
yeah. You mentioned liking dark comedies, and that's a favorite of mine as well. What is something that you maybe have watched recently, or even your, favorite dark comedy of all times?
Oh gosh. Well, one dark comedy that I like these days is the show Succession on HBO. Have you heard of it?
Okay. Yeah, I have.
Yeah, it's a dark comedy. I think it's an hour long, but it's definitely comedic in tone, and it's really brilliantly done. It's about this. I think it's like maybe loosely inspired by Rupert Murdoch and his family, but it's this family that runs like a media conglomerate, and the patriarch of the family is in ill health, and so they know that they need to find a successor, and it's kind of the warring and the politics in the family to just discover who's going to take over his spot.
Hmm.
So it's very kind of biting in its tone, but it's very funny. It's very smart. The performances are great. The writing is great. And one thing that they do well on that show is there is emotion to it, but they kind of keep, they're subtle about it. They keep a lot of it under the surface, and they plant all these seeds, and then they'll have a few moments here and there where they really let it come to the surface. And when they finally let that happen, it's so impactful, and it's just like this big wow moment because you've been sort of building up to these things for an entire season and then all of a sudden it's finally expressed, and so it feels really rewarding as a viewer to see that. So that's a show that I'm loving right now that I would definitely safe with the dark comedy mold.
I think I'm gonna have to put this show on my list now because you're probably the fifth or sixth person that's been praising this
Yeah,
show. And yeah,
it's
I've heard
one.
about it a lot now, so I think
It's definitely worth watching. It's very good.
yeah, I'm gonna have to check that out now. But and since you mentioned dark comedies, I have to ask, did you watch Jojo Rabbit last year?
I did. I finally watched it actually only like a couple months ago at home. It
Oh,
was so good. Yeah, it was, the storytelling was really good. Such an original idea and an original take on a topic and a time in history that has already been covered a lot. And
yeah.
also just visually, it was beautiful. Like I wanted to go and live in that house that they had. It was kind of a little bit like Wes Anderson esque in terms of the
Yeah,
visual.
I'll agree. And
Yeah,
it felt like they, you know, all aspects of it were good because, like you said, it's a unique take on it. But then also the visuals and the like direction and everything, and then obviously the actors and their work and all. They were all of it was good. So even I really enjoyed that. And um, again, like you said, it was great that they managed to. Bring this original take out because now that you hear about some movie around this entire topic or something, you're just, you don't know if you'll get to see anything new because so much has already been made about it.
yeah,
So
yeah.
definitely.
But I think it just goes to show, people will say like there's no such thing as a new idea, and that's kind of
Yeah.
true. But you can always find a new take on something, or you can always take a topic that someone else has talked about. But if you really bring your own authentic perspective to it, you can bring something new. Um, and so there's always room for originality, even though it feels sometimes like everything's been done.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, I understand why people say it's all like recycled or something because things have all been said. But then again, they've not been said in your way or something. So there's always margin for something great coming out of it.
Yeah, yeah. I think in the world of publishing right now, and in film and TV, there's a lot of emphasis on authentic voices and authenticity, and people
Hmm.
bringing their own perspectives and kind of lived experiences to the table, which is really valuable in that sense because I think that we can have a lot of originality that way, and we can have voices and ideas that we haven't necessarily heard before because they've always been marginalized or just not as much of what's traditionally brought to the table. So I
Yeah.
think that's an important thing for any writer is like really digging in deep and finding that authenticity and finding, what's your story that nobody else can tell, or what's a
Hmm.
story that other people could tell, but nobody could tell it the way that you're telling it. And Jojo Rabbit is a great example of that. Like nobody else would have told that story that way that Taika Waititi did. So
Yeah.
um, just finding like what your unique perspective is, I think is always a good place to start.
Yeah, I think we've been seeing a lot of that in the past, at least past few years, because most of the really good movies that came out last year, I did see that element of everyone bringing their story and their originality to the table, and I'm loving that shift. I want to see more now.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, so we do have to wrap up really soon, but before we do that, it would really not make sense to not mention something that has been a hot topic in the United States in the past month.
Mm.
And how has it been like in terms of the political climate over there? How are you guys, not really going too much into detail about it, but since I'm talking to someone who's living in the US, I have to bring that up. How has that been going?
It's funny that you bring that up because I feel like politics are so overwhelming here. And from what I hear from people who live in other countries, US politics are in the news there all the time too. And it's definitely not, the reverse is not true. Like we don't pay as much attention to politics in other countries, which I think is kind of a shame. But yeah, it's been a lot. It's kind of a relief that the election is over now and it's died down a little bit. But I don't know. I get frustrated with politics because I feel like it's just so overwhelming these days and it's so divisive and it's all about like us versus them and people putting so much emphasis on politics as opposed to just governance and actually like doing their jobs as
Yeah.
politicians. But one thing that I did a couple of days ago that was actually kind of refreshing was there's the race for the North Carolina Supreme Court justice it happened, in November, but it was very, very close. It was like out of millions of votes, it came down to about 400 votes between the two candidates. So they've been doing multiple recounts to try to make sure that they got it correct. And
Mm.
I volunteered a couple of days ago to go supervise one of the recounts. They basically need people in the room to make sure that like the protocols are being followed and all of that. And it was actually really refreshing to see because it's like this team of people from the board of elections in the local county. And it was like 4 women, 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats. They make sure that it's bipartisan. But they were all like getting along really well. They were friends. They had like matching T-shirts they had made for like their special, week of tallying the votes. They were very much following all the process and trying to do everything as fairly as possible. And it was really nice to see because I think all of the division and the fighting and the conflict between people is what we see in the media and what gets kind of like trumped up and put out there loudly. But I think real people, for the most part, are not that divided. We're a lot closer than we think that we are,
Yeah.
and we're closer than kind of how it's portrayed. And so to see like these people sort of behind the curtain of government doing the actual work on the ground and the fact that like they can be different party members and still be friends and work together and be really like honestly trying to get a fair count on the vote and doing their jobs,
Mm.
that was really nice to see. So it was sort of a nice, after a very contentious election year, it was sort of a nice end to that for me, I think.
It also felt kind of climatic because this was happening near the end of the year, and then 2020 has just been building up. Everything, every month we've been seeing at least a couple of new things, and I think nothing phases us anymore. But it did feel really climatic to me that we were nearing the end, and now we're going to have this huge result, and then lots of dramas going to surround that and everything.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it
But
was.
hopefully, the coming down from the climax will be smoother than the build up.
I hope so. I think we could all use a little bit of like the term denouement, like at the end of the story after the climax, where things kind of settle down and the final pieces are put into place. Like I think we collectively could use a denouement right now, just like a slowing down period and kind of
Yeah,
recuperating from the past year. And so I think we're owed that at this point.
definitely. Yeah. Okay, so we have to end now. I would love to keep talking for another hour or so. I have absolutely no problem going on. But yeah, we have to end. But before that, I just want to do like a very small segment just for fun purposes because I've always wanted to do this. I want to do a small rapid fire with you.
Okay.
And yeah, so I have to ask, what is your favorite fictional character from movies, books, or anything? But one character.
Gosh. I'll say Harry Potter, even though
Oh,
his character
that's a
isn't that interesting.
fair
But
answer. Yeah, no, but that's a fair answer. Acceptable. And what is now, this one is interesting. What is the favorite character that you've ever written? Um, all of your screenwriting, fiction writing, everything included.
I would say maybe a character in a book that I'm working on right now, which I don't want to go into too much detail about because it's still
Yeah.
sort of in the works. But I think she's a protagonist I really connect with more so than maybe any character I've ever written before. So that's been a lot of fun to write.
Okay, you know what? I'm gonna be on the lookout for that one. And I'm gonna go read the book and wonder, oh, is this the one she was talking about?
I'll try to drop things.
What is your favorite movie?
Um, there's a movie called Harold and Maude. Have you heard of it? It's from like around 1970. It's another dark comedy, so you might like it. It's kind of a cult
Right.
classic. It's
Oh, okay.
yeah, it's really good. It's weird, but it's good.
Yeah, great. I haven't really heard of it, but I might check it out sometime.
Sure.
And I have the last question. Is your dog still around?
He is. Can you? I don't know if you can see him sleeping in my chair.
Oh, so you've been sharing the chair with him all this
Yeah,
time.
yeah. He like saw his bird or whatever it was out the window and got excited, and then he's like, I'm just gonna go back to sleep. So that's what he does. A lot of times when I write, he's just lying there
He's
snoring
sleeping
away.
there. Oh, great. I thought he was being really patient or something. I was like, that's a very good dog. He's very
Yeah,
silent.
the pug, so he just goes to sleep easily. That's what they do. Sleep and
Yeah,
eat.
yeah. Well, I approve. um, all right then. That's all we had for everyone today, and I think it's our time now. But thanks for joining with us, Sarah, and it really was amazing to talk to you about your book and everything. I'm gonna go and finish it, and also really excited to read anything else that you write, poets and everything included. So thanks for joining in.
Thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it.
I'm glad you did. And well, thanks to the Ahmedabad Book Club and to Karma Foundation for making this happen. And um, yeah, I guess hopefully I'll get to see you some other time, and hopefully everyone else will. And but for now, goodbye, everyone.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.